Hi, writers. Today we are going to talk about finding and growing seed ideas. So we're getting really, really close to the end of our generating ideas. Um, and starting next week, actually, we're going to begin writing our selected memoir. But the step that we're going to take this week is really important. So we're going to find and grow seed ideas. And in order to do that, it takes a lot of going back and looking at entries that you've already read and possibly rereading those entries and looking for themes or patterns or issues that you kind of feel like you keep writing about over and over. So I'm going to walk you through the steps to do that today. All right, so the first thing that you want to do is to reread entries and mark parts of them that light sparks or that stand out to you. Okay, then you're going to reread entries that you marked looking for connections or patterns between them. And I want you to not stop with the first theme that you find. Try to dig a little bit deeper and look for other issues or themes that underlie several entries. So instead of just looking at one entry and picking out a theme, see if you can try to find a theme or an issue that kind of goes across different entries that you've written. Okay, once you've done that, you're going to actually choose then a theme or an issue, select one, and then you can go back to reread the entries that are related to that particular issue. And then lastly, okay, so this is what we're doing today and tomorrow. You're going to plan and then write an entry that combines thoughts and stories related to this theme or issue. So I did this already in my writer's notebook, and I just want to walk you through the steps that I took. So I'm going to go into my writer's notebook to show you. Okay, so I'm just going to present it. Okay, so the first entry that I wrote was about first times, and I selected a first time that I wrote about. So feel free throughout this video if you want to pause and read my entries over again. I'm not going to read all of my entries again, but I am going to read the entry that I wrote today. Um, so as I was looking through this entry, I wrote about the first time that I traveled to Europe by myself. So the first step that I wanted to take was to reread the entries and just mark anything that stands out to me. So I highlighted a spot in this entry that stood out to me. As I was on my trip on the plane, I all of a sudden got really nervous. Like I was really excited, but then when I was on the plane, I actually got really nervous and I kept asking myself, like, what am I doing? Where am I going? I tried to calm myself, but that fear of the unknown kind of started taking over. So that just like stood out to me in this particular entry. My next entry was the one where I was influenced by another author's words. So I took the quote by Sandra Cisneros and I wrote an entry. So this one is actually about crying and how sometimes as an adult, even as an adult, I can get overwhelmed and stressed out. And one of the things that I do that I sometimes feel like I need to do is cry. And it feels weird because it kind of feels like as an adult, you're not supposed to do that, but it definitely makes me feel better when I do. And there are other things that I do as well to feel better too. So the thing that stood out to me is this idea that I wrote that I try to find healthy ways to overcome things that are stressful to me. The next entry that I wrote about was kind of related back to that previous entry. So I asked myself questions and then I just wrote an entry off of that. So it's just about kind of going off of that previous entry, how there are things that I can do when I'm feeling overwhelmed and stressed. And one of the things that I wrote about in this entry was going on walks. So that helps me to feel better. Um, all right, so now that I've marked spots or parts that stood out to me, I wanted to see if there was maybe a connection or a pattern between them. So I kind of noticed that like when I went back, I saw this idea of like ways to help myself when I'm feeling stressed out. But again, I don't want to just stop there with the first idea. I want to make sure that I really think and dig deeper here about other issues or themes that might underlie several entries. So going back to the first entry that I wrote, I really wanted to tie that in as well. This trip that I took to Europe. So I tried to think like, is there an underlying theme throughout all of these entries? And I was really thinking deeply about this. It took me a little bit of time, but I thought about how, for me personally, like trying to find ways to overcome fears is something that I try to do in my life. So I thought that maybe that could be more of an overarching theme that I could write about. So for my entry today, let me just bring you to that page. What I did was I wrote the word theme at the top of my page. You could see that it's pretty clear here. And I actually wrote out a theme statement at the top of my page. So it really kept me grounded in what I'm going to focus on now. So I've selected a theme and I'm writing that at the top of my entry. And I'd like you to do that as well. So the theme that I decided to go with after going back and thinking about issues or underlying themes throughout my entries is that we all have fears and flaws, but we can find ways to work with them and overcome them. So as I was going back to my entries, that's what I kind of came away with. So I'm actually going to show you the entry that I wrote. I'm actually going to read it out to you because that was my last step in all of this, to plan and write an entry that combines thoughts and stories related to this theme or issue. So I'm going to read it to you. Okay. I used to always be afraid to venture too far from home, and to this day, I find the most comfort being close to my family. But I always knew that I wanted to break out of my shell a little bit. When I went away to college, I had a really hard time adjusting, and so I decided to go to a college that wouldn't be too far from home. But there was a moment during college when I decided I was going to take a leap of faith and try to overcome my fears. I decided to study abroad in Rome, Italy. I had never been to Europe before, let alone by myself. This is true. I knew that it wouldn't be easy for me, but I was determined to do this. Finally, the time came to go. I'll never forget driving with my parents and my brother to JFK Airport and getting one final meal together before I got on a plane and flew off to a land that I really knew nothing about. Was I crazy? What was I doing? Doubt started to fill my mind, and I started to panic and get scared. I don't want to go, I pleaded with my parents. Of course, this got them a little worried. But no, I had made my decision to do this, and I was going to. When I first arrived, I felt completely lost. I couldn't communicate with anyone. I knew no one. I eventually met my new roommates, and I learned that we were all feeling the same way. I wasn't alone after all. After about a week of adjustment, I actually started to feel comfortable in Rome. And believe it or not, by the time that trip came to an end, I didn't want to leave. This moment was such an important one for me that because it was when I learned that I can face my fears and overcome them. All right. So I really want you, I'm going to challenge you to really try to think deeply about your entries that you've written, and really try to generate an entry that is taking a small idea and really growing it. And this is going to really be helpful for you next week when you actually decide on and begin writing your memoir. So that's my challenge to you. And just so that you're aware, I am going to be grading this entry that you're doing today and maybe, into tomorrow as well. But this one is going to be graded. So make sure that you're really putting time into it. Okay. All right. So off you go, writers.